What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved action heroes sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken personalities, and everything goes completely sideways? Picture this: Sylvester Stallone, the legendary actor who gave the world Rocky, Rambo, and countless iconic cinematic moments, sitting across from Joy Behar on The View. What was supposed to be a light-hearted promotional interview quickly unraveled into an on-air disaster that nobody, producers included, was prepared for. We're talking about a clash so intense, so unexpected, that it ended with one of the hosts storming off the set in front of millions of stunned viewers. The tension in the studio became so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. Friendly banter turned into sharp exchanges, and within minutes, it was clear that this interview was heading in a direction no one had anticipated. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened behind the scenes. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around, because what unfolds next is absolutely wild. It began like any other typical morning at The View, or at least that's what everyone thought. The studio buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as producers counted down to air. Camera operators adjusted their angles, stage managers whispered final instructions, and the live audience chatted excitedly among themselves. The segment had been promoted as a fun, casual conversation with Sylvester Stallone about his latest project. Nostalgic return of one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. The lighting was perfect. The set looked immaculate. All 5 hosts were seated at the table, coffee mugs in place, smiles ready. It was television routine at its finest. Joy Behar, known for her sharp wit and refusal to shy away from controversy, seemed especially energized that morning. She leaned forward slightly, scanning her notes, her expression hinting that she had more on her mind than just movie trivia. Those who knew her well could sense it. This interview was not going to stay surface level for long. As Sylvester Stallone walked onto the set, the audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. He looked every bit the movie star, confident, composed, and unmistakably charismatic. Dressed in a tailored jacket and dark shirt, he waved to the crowd with that familiar smile that had captivated audiences for decades. It was the smile of a man who had survived Hollywood, reinvented himself multiple times, and still commanded respect. Whoopi Goldberg, seated at the center of the table, greeted him warmly, standing slightly as she extended her hand. "Sylvester Stallone, welcome back to The View," Whoopi said with a grin. "It's always great to have you here." The applause swelled again as Stallone took his seat in the guest chair, appearing relaxed and completely at ease. He nodded appreciatively toward the audience before turning to the panel. "Thank you for having me," Stallone said. "It's always a pleasure to be here with you ladies." Sarah Haynes smiled brightly, Alyssa Farah Griffin nodded politely, and Sunny Hostin offered a welcoming glance. Everything appeared normal, comfortable even. But then there was Joy. She smiled too, but there was something calculated behind it. Her eyes lingered on Stallone just a second longer than necessary, as if she were already lining up her first shot. Years of television experience had made her an expert at reading moments and creating them. Whoopi kicked things off smoothly, asking Stallone about his new project, his enduring career, and how it felt to still be working at the highest level after so many decades in the industry. Stallone responded with charm and humility, sharing anecdotes from set and reflecting on how grateful he felt to still be doing what he loved. The audience laughed when expected, applauded at the right moments, and everything seemed to be moving along exactly as planned. Then Joy leaned forward. "So, Sylvester," she said, tilting her head slightly, "you've been in this industry a very long time. You've played some of the most iconic tough guys in movie history." Stallone smiled. "I've had a few punches thrown my way," he joked. Joy smiled back, but didn't laugh, "and those characters," she continued, "have become symbols for a certain kind of masculinity. Do you ever worry about the message that sends, especially in today's political and social climate?" The air shifted. Stallone's smile faded just slightly, not dramatically, but enough for the cameras to catch it. He adjusted in his seat, still calm, still composed. "I think people understand the difference between fiction and real life," he replied carefully. "These characters are stories, They're about struggle, perseverance, and overcoming adversity. Joy wasn't satisfied, but don't you think, she pressed, that with your influence you have a responsibility to speak out more clearly on issues like politics, violence, and social justice? The audience grew quiet. Stallone paused, choosing his words. I believe responsibility also means knowing when not to lecture. He said evenly, I tell stories. People can take from them what they will. Joy raised an eyebrow. So you're saying you don't think celebrities should use their platform to shape public opinion? Stallone leaned back slightly. I think people are capable of thinking for themselves, he said. I respect them enough not to assume they need guidance from me. That was the moment seasoned viewers later pointed to as the turning point. Joy's expression tightened. The smile disappeared. Well, she said sharply, that sounds like avoiding responsibility to me. Whoopi shifted in her chair, sensing the change in energy. Sunny glanced down at the table. Sarah's posture stiffened. The friendly interview was officially gone. What followed would escalate into one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television. An exchange so heated, so unexpected, that it would leave the panel fractured, the audience stunned, and one host walking off the set in disbelief. His reply came calmly, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that had become instantly recognizable through decades of iconic performances. It was the same voice that once echoed through boxing rings, battlefields, and quiet moments of reflection on screen, a voice that conveyed strength, resilience, and hard-earned wisdom. As he spoke, the studio audience leaned in slightly, sensing that rare combination of humility and confidence that only a veteran like him could project so effortlessly. Before the moment could linger too long, Sarah Haynes smoothly stepped in, doing what seasoned hosts do best, directing the conversation towards safer, more comfortable territory. With a warm smile and an enthusiastic nod, she shifted the focus. So, tell us about this new movie, she said brightly. We've heard it's quite different from your usual action roles. Almost immediately, Stallone's face lit up. The tension that had briefly hovered over the table dissolved, replaced by genuine excitement. This was clearly a subject close to his heart. He leaned forward slightly, his posture more open now, and began speaking with the passion of someone who had waited a long time to tell this particular story. You know, he began thoughtfully, after all these years of throwing punches, chasing bad guys, and playing characters who solve problems with their fists, I felt like it was time to challenge myself in a different way. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to do something that really tested me as a performer, not just physically, but emotionally. He went on to explain that the film was a deeply personal project, one that explored themes far removed from explosions and fight sequences. This film is really close to my heart, he continued. It's about second chances, about redemption, and about confronting the mistakes we all carry with us. I think those are themes everyone can relate to, no matter who you are or where you come from. As he spoke, the audience listened in respectful silence. There was something disarming about seeing a man so often associated with toughness speak so openly about vulnerability. Sunny Hostin nodded appreciatively, clearly moved by the sincerity in his words. That sounds wonderful, she said warmly, and it's great to see you expanding your horizons and showing different sides of yourself as an actor. For a brief moment, the conversation flowed exactly as the producers had hoped. The atmosphere felt relaxed, almost intimate. Laughter came easily, smiles were exchanged, and the discussion centered on creativity, growth, and the evolution of a long and storied career. It was the kind of segment daytime television thrives on, uplifting, reflective, and broadly appealing. But then Joy Behar leaned forward slightly. It was a subtle movement, one that might have gone unnoticed by casual viewers, but for anyone familiar with her style, it was a clear signal. This was the moment when the conversation was about to take a sharp turn. Her body language shifted, her expression tightening just enough to suggest that something had been weighing on her mind. Sylvester, she began, her tone polite but edged with seriousness, before we talk more about the movie, I have to ask you something that's been bothering me. The change in the studio was immediate. The light, easy energy seemed to drain from the room, replaced by a quiet tension that could almost be felt. Cameras adjusted slightly, producers glanced at their monitors, and the co-hosts instinctively fell silent. Stallone sensed it too. His relaxed demeanor shifted as he straightened in his chair, his expression becoming more guarded. Years in the public eye had taught him to recognize moments like this. Still, he remained composed. "Sure, Joy," he replied evenly. "What's on your mind?" Joy's voice took on that familiar sharpness that regular viewers knew all too well, the tone she used when she was about to challenge a guest rather than simply interview them. "I've been thinking a lot about the characters you've played over the years," she said, "especially Rocky and Rambo." She paused briefly, letting the names hang in the air, "and I have to say," she continued, "I'm troubled by the messaging in some of these films." A flicker of surprise crossed Stallone's face as he blinked, clearly taken aback by the direction of the question. The room grew quieter still. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the beginnings of a confrontation. What had moments ago been a warm discussion about artistic growth had now transformed into something far more unpredictable, a live television exchange that could redefine the entire segment in an instant. And everyone watching knew one thing for certain. This conversation was no longer just about a movie. Joy Behar did not hesitate. In fact, it seemed as though she had been waiting for the opening. Her posture straightened, and her voice gained momentum as she leaned forward slightly, addressing not just Stallone, but the audience watching at home. "Well," Joy continued, "these characters you've played for decades, they solve everything with violence. Rocky wins through fighting. Rambo kills his way through every problem. Don't you think that sends a dangerous message to young people, that violence is the answer to everything?" The shift in the room was unmistakable. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances, instantly sensing that this was no longer the light, promotional interview they had planned. The warmth that had filled the studio moments earlier evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that hung heavy in the air. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to interject, her voice calm and measured, hoping to steer the discussion back to safer ground. "Well, maybe we can," she began, but Joy was just getting started. Stallone straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to mild irritation. His jaw tightened slightly, a sign that he was carefully choosing his words. "Joy," he said firmly, "with all due respect, I think you're missing the point of these characters entirely. Rocky isn't about violence, it's about perseverance. It's about never giving up against impossible odds. It's about a man who keeps getting knocked down and still finds the strength to stand back up." He paused briefly, then continued, "And Rambo is about a veteran struggling with trauma, abandonment, and a society that forgot about him. That character comes from pain, not glorification." Joy shook her head dismissively, unconvinced. "But at the end of the day," she countered, "they're still solving their problems by punching people or shooting them. How is that not promoting violence? Because," Stallone replied, his voice now carrying a hint of frustration, "these are fictional characters in extraordinary situations. Rocky fights in a boxing ring, which is a sport, a regulated competition with rules, and Rambo is a soldier dealing with impossible circumstances in war. These aren't ordinary people walking around starting fights because they're angry." But Joy wasn't backing down. "Young people watch these movies," she said sharply. "They see their heroes using violence, and then they think that's how they should handle their problems. Don't you feel any responsibility for that?" The tension in the studio became palpable. You could feel it in the silence between words, in the way the audience stopped shifting in their seats. Stallone's jaw clenched as he processed what he was now clearly perceiving as an attack on his life's work. "Joy," he said slowly, his voice controlled but firm, "I've been making movies for over 40 years. I've always tried to create characters that inspire people, characters that show them they can overcome adversity, no matter how stacked the odds are against them. If you can't see the deeper meaning in those stories, then maybe you're the one missing something." The remark landed hard. Joy's eyes flashed with anger, and she shot back instantly. "Are you suggesting that I'm too stupid to understand your movies, Sylvester?" "I'm not saying you're stupid," Stallone replied, his voice growing louder now. "I'm saying you're deliberately misinterpreting them to make some kind of political point." The other hosts looked genuinely concerned. Whoopi tried again to calm the situation, lifting her hands slightly. "Let's all take a breath here. Maybe we can?" But Joy cut her off, her voice rising above the room. "Political point? This isn't political. This is about taking responsibility for the content you put into the world." She leaned forward, her tone accusatory now. "You've made billions of dollars glorifying violence, and when someone calls you out on it, you get defensive instead of owning up to it." Stallone's face was reddening, his famous temper beginning to show. The calm restraint he'd maintained for decades of interviews was cracking. "Glorifying violence," he shot back. "Are you kidding me? These movies are about hope. They're about fighting for what's right. They're about never giving up when the world tells you that you don't matter." His voice hardened. "If you can't see that, then you're either blind, or you're choosing to ignore it because it doesn't fit your narrative." Joy's eyes narrowed dangerously at the word narrative. "My narrative?" she snapped. "My narrative is that maybe, just maybe, someone who's made a fortune off violent entertainment should show a little humility when questioned about it." Stallone leaned forward now, his voice dropping into that low, intense tone moviegoers recognized immediately. The tone that meant things were about to escalate. "Humility," he said quietly. "You want to talk about humility? How about showing some humility yourself instead of sitting there on your high horse judging work you clearly don't understand?" The audience was completely silent now. No clapping, no murmurs, just shock. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, while Sonny Hostin was frantically trying to catch the producer's attention off camera. This had gone far beyond a typical daytime television disagreement. Joy's voice rose again, louder and more combative. "I understand perfectly well, Sylvester. I understand that you've built an empire on the idea that the solution to every problem is to hit it harder or shoot it." And before she could finish the sentence, the studio knew one thing for certain. This interview was no longer under control. And when intelligent people try to have a conversation about the impact of that messaging, Joy said sharply, her voice cutting through the studio, sharp enough to make even the audience tense, "You resort to personal attacks." Stallone blinked, disbelief flooding his features. "Personal attacks." He echoed, leaning forward now, no longer relaxed, no longer casually amused. His voice had that gravelly intensity, the kind that had made him legendary in cinema, and now it carried the unmistakable weight of a man deeply offended. "You call this personal attacks?" The audience collectively held its breath. Cameras shifted slightly to catch every flicker of emotion, every micro-expression that crossed his face. The energy in the studio had changed. What had started as a promotional interview about a passion project had morphed into a confrontation that crackled with electric tension. The air seemed heavier, charged with a sense that something extraordinary, something historic, was unfolding. "You started this whole thing," Stallone continued, his voice rising just enough to carry emotion but not yet fully erupt. "You attacked everything I've worked for my entire career. You came after my characters, my movies, my life's work, and now you're surprised that I'm defending myself." The cameras zoomed in, capturing the tightness in his jaw, the strain around his eyes. This was not an actor delivering lines for effect. It was a man whose pride, whose decades of dedication, was being questioned in real time on a national platform. Every word, every pause, seemed to press down. On the air itself, Whoopi Goldberg raised both hands, her voice calm but urgent, attempting once more to regain control. "Okay, everyone," she said, almost pleading, "let's take a step back. This is getting a little heated." But Joy cut her off, spinning toward Whoopi with a sharpness that silenced any hope of mediation. "No, Whoopi," she snapped, venom lacing her words. "I'm not backing down from this. Someone needs to hold these Hollywood types accountable for what they put out there." The words landed like a physical strike in the studio. Stallone's face flushed, the color rising from red to nearly purple. His eyes widened, not out of anger initially, but in sheer disbelief. "Hollywood types." He repeated slowly, shaking his head, as if attempting to process the audacity of that statement. He leaned forward, gripping the arms of his chair, a subtle sign that his famous temper was about to surface. "Lady," he said, his voice trembling with restrained fury, "I didn't grow up in Hollywood. I grew up poor, Hell's Kitchen, sleeping in bus stations, writing scripts nobody wanted to read." The audience stirred uneasily. The weight of his words began to resonate with them. "I created Rocky," he continued, voice cracking slightly under the intensity of his own emotion. Because I believed in the underdog. Because I was the underdog. I knew what it felt like to get knocked down, to be counted out, and still find the strength to get back up. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the room might soften. There was a palpable sense of empathy, a connection to the vulnerability that Stallone rarely allowed the public to see. But Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, spare me the sob story," she shot back. "Every actor in Hollywood has some hard luck tale about how they struggled." Stallone froze, the shock clear on his face. For a second, the studio seemed to pause with him, every crew member, every audience member holding their collective breath. "That doesn't give you a free pass," Joy continued, her words coming faster now, sharper, "to pump out mindless violence for decades." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. The audience gasped audibly. Sarah Haynes' eyes widened. Sunny Hostin pressed her lips together tightly, and Alyssa Farah Griffin looked away, visibly uncomfortable. Stallone stared at Joy in disbelief, his mouth slightly open, as if his mind refused to accept what it had just heard. "Mindless violence," he repeated slowly, letting each word land deliberately. His voice dropped dangerously. "Quiet, you just called 40 years of my work mindless violence." Even Joy seemed for a split second to hesitate, a flicker of doubt crossing her eyes, but pride held her in place. "If the shoe fits, Sylvester," she began. That was the breaking point. Stallone rose from his chair, not abruptly, not theatrically, slowly, deliberately. The motion alone sent shockwaves through the studio. Producers off, camera visibly panicked. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, gasp, or remain entirely silent. "You don't get to reduce my life's work to a cheap insult," Stallone said, his voice firm, powerful, unfiltered. "You don't get to erase the meaning those films had for millions of people just because they don't fit your narrative." Joy scoffed. "Oh, please, no." Stallone cut her off sharply. "You've spent decades sitting behind a desk judging people from a place of comfort. You've never stepped into the ring, never taken the hits. But you're happy to tell everyone else what they're doing wrong." The audience erupted. Half gasps, half stunned murmurs, everyone leaning forward in disbelief. "My films weren't about violence," Stallone continued, voice rising with the cadence of a preacher and the intensity of a man whose life experience had shaped every syllable. "They were about perseverance, discipline, sacrifice, about getting up when the world tells you to stay down." He pointed gently toward the audience, and those stories mattered. They mattered to people who didn't have privilege, who didn't have a voice, who needed something, anything, to believe in. Joy stood as well, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Oh, so now you're some kind of hero." She sneered. "No," Stallone replied immediately. "I'm a storyteller, and I never claimed to be perfect. But I never looked down on the people who supported me." Whoopi stood halfway out of her chair, hands raised, attempting one last intervention. Okay, we're stopping this right now," she said firmly. But Joy was not finished. "You don't get to lecture me on morality," she shouted. "Not with your history." Stallone laughed once, but there was no humor in it. His eyes burned with intensity. "My history," he said. "I've owned my mistakes. I've paid for them. I never pretended I was above anyone." He leaned forward, locking eyes with Joy. "But you," he continued, "you sit there calling people Hollywood types, tearing down decades of work, and somehow you think you're the moral authority." Joy's face turned bright red. "This is my show," she snapped, "and that," Stallone said calmly, "is exactly the problem." The studio was dead silent, every eye locked on the tension of the table. Joy stared at him for a long moment, breathing hard. Then, without another word, she reached up and yanked off her microphone. "I'm not doing this," she said sharply. "I refuse to be disrespected like this." She slammed the mic onto the table and stormed off the set. Cameras scrambled, producers rushed in, the audience sat stunned, unsure whether they had just witnessed television history or utter chaos. Stallone remained standing, chest rising and falling slowly, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. Finally, Whoopi spoke, barely above a whisper. We'll be right back." The screen cut to commercial, leaving viewers across the world frozen in disbelief. They had just witnessed one of the most explosive, uncomfortable, and unforgettable moments in daytime television history. An unfiltered confrontation between a legend defending his life's work and a host holding firm to a critique. The echoes of that confrontation would linger, replayed endlessly across social media, debated in living rooms, offices, and forums everywhere. No one would forget the intensity, the passion, or the raw humanity on display.